Clean that up a little bit, and now I have to put this new bushing in the tube. So I'm hoping I can just use the pliers and compress this knob, and similar on the back side, slide it in there. Okay, that was pretty easy. I just used the channel locks and squeezed the tabs and worked it back and forth. I had it a little crooked, but I was able to rotate it with a screwdriver slightly, and I used a little silicone lubricant on it so it slid in nicely. Okay, this is the steering from my 1959 TR3. I've taken it all apart. I painted this lower tube, even painted the shaft that goes inside it where it wouldn't interfere with anything. And so the worm gear slides in from the end there to the right. And then there's this peg shaft that engages the worm and rotates. And on this end, on the splined end of the shaft, there's this drop arm, I think it's called. And you can see there's a mark, a scribe-like mark there, and there's a matching one on here for that alignment. Here's all the shims that came out. These are on the front, and they set the end float in the bearings, basically to keep the shaft from going back and forth this direction. There's one race that I didn't take out. It's down in there, and it's bearing. And here's the race and bearing for the end of the shaft. And so you put this cover on and use the right number of shims to get no end float in this shaft. It says in the manual that you can have absolutely no end float, but a little bit of preload is okay. And so I have to measure this and see if it was right. There are a couple marks in this worm gear, but I'm gonna use it as they're expensive, and I'll see how it goes. I also have a lot of wear on this peg, and interestingly it's not at 180, so I've got some white out on there. I'm going to mark where the wear is, and then I'm going to take the peg out, I hope, and rotate it and put a fresh surface against the worm gear. So, and this is the adjustment for pushing down on the peg, where you're supposed to have just a slight resistance when this is at the center and none on the ends. So I'm going to try to adjust that as well. I guess the end float is supposed to be done first, so I'm going to put it together, adjust the end float, and not even have this peg touching the gear at all, and then I'll set the end float. So now I've drawn a line on there where the center of the wear on each side of the peg. So it's not quite 90 degrees to the arm. And so I'll try to rotate it 90 after I press it out. Okay, and I have the 2-socket approach for trying to press this out in a very cheap arbor press. You can see I've bent the handle once already, but I put some pressure on it and hit it on the top with a hammer, and that seems to work pretty well. Okay, that actually went well. It came out fairly easy, went back in even easier, and it's hard to see because the line got a little mushed up, but I did rotate it 90. Okay, steering box is in the vise, and I'm going to assemble it. First step is the bearing that goes in. Get the light here. So he's in there, the race is in there, I didn't take it out. Now comes the shaft. It's probably a good idea not to drop it onto the bearings. Okay. So the next bearing goes on the top. And this one, the race is here. And there's a quite a bit of a lip here, so I can tell right off I need a lot of shimming. I think maybe I'll just measure that to see what it's at right now. Of course, my caliper is in this drawer that I can't open because I have the shaft and the vise blocking it. Stand by. Okay, so roughly 30 mils. Okay, so I need about 30 mils. That measurement's not real accurate, but I measured the shims that were in there, and I have 3 10 mils and a 2 mil. So that's ballpark, right? But if this measurement of 30 mils was correct, that'd be 2 mils at end float, which is no good. But my 30 mil measurement's not that accurate. And then I bought a gasket. There wasn't one in there initially, and I'd rather it not leak. And the gasket is 4 mils. So I have a feeling when I put it together, I'm going to find out that I can't stand the gasket, because even if I take this one out, it'll be too much end float. And that would explain why they didn't have one in there, but let's see what happens. So I have the dial indicator set up on here. I get the shaft and the vise. And I didn't torque the cover down very tight because I don't want to hurt the bearings. But if I can move this, and I see that I have, it's hard to do with one hand, but I have a few mils of end float. So I think I'm going to torque it down to torque specs now and see what it goes to. I think the gasket is actually a bad idea. There's 4 shims in there, so what am I supposed to do? Put a gasket between every shim? So I think the gasket can come out. Okay, after torquing it, I have no movement. And I torqued it in stages and watched, and it just gradually decreased and got to 0, and I gave it a little more torque after that to give it just a slight amount of preload, and that seemed to work quite well. Okay, I have a new seal I'm going to put in. I have a new bushing too, but I don't think I'm going to put it in. The shaft is tight, and I don't know if I can get that bushing out. I have to, it looks like it has to come out this direction into the camera, but I can't really get anything in there to tap it out. At least I'm not sure I'll tap it out. I'm afraid I might just make a mess of it and then not be able to get it out. So I think I'm going to leave that. The bushing, or the old seal, came out pretty easily. It's right there, what's left of it. And I just used this seal puller. And now just going to pop the new one in. I actually went in maybe too easy. I just pushed it in with my thumbs. Usually they go in a little tougher than that. Anyway, I'm going to put some grease on it. They say to grease it so that the spline doesn't damage it on the way through from the rocker shaft. If the shaft is in, rocker shaft is in, you can see the grease I put on there to push it through the new seal. I set this mid-range best I could, and then I put a mark on the shaft here in line with the pin or nub from the bearing, so I know which way is where the shaft is to have the steering at least roughly centered. Okay, I put the holder on. If I didn't clip out some video, you would have seen me put the drop arm on the nut and then take it back off when I realized I forgot to put this holder arm on. The steering box is installed loosely. I'm going to get everything lined up before I tighten it down. So I've got the trunnion bracket here, and I put some oil in there, just enough that I can set the top pressure plate. I'm going to install the gasket and the cover plate next. Okay, it's all adjusted. I didn't put all the oil in because I don't have the stator tube and this gland nut on yet. And I didn't have oil on top of this, so maybe it was a good thing. When I adjust it, it's extremely sensitive. I can turn it just maybe a 64th of a turn, and I can feel it hit in the center of the center of the travel. and then I just backed it off a hair and tightened it down, and I feel just a tinge of binding when I turn it in the center. I mean, I shouldn't say binding, but so I put the oil in. I think that'll take care of things. Steering back out, wishbone in. Now it's time to put the steering in again. I slid the stator tube in from the top. I've got the oil plug in, trunnion collar, and so I tightened up the bolts for this block first because it really can't move, so tightened him up first. These guys that hold the steering box from rotating are last because I want to let it rotate as long as I can. So then I tightened up these guys, since again that really can't move much, and then I'll tighten up this next, and it'll be it. Well, and this guy, and he really can't move much either, other than along the axial direction. So I don't think it matters too much when I tighten him. Okay, hoping this goes well, I have a wire fed through the stator tube and just taped it to the wires. You can see it sticking out here. So hopefully I can slide that right through. Okay, that worked. And I had the stator tubes got a slot that was 12 o'clock. And then on the bottom, well, on the bottom of this, there's some people call it a finger, little aluminum casting piece that's different than the rest of the circle that rotates independent. So that's pointed straight down. I think that's what you're supposed to do. Here are the wires coming out of the control head and the stator tube.